The massive Coalition flagship drifted silently through space, its crystalline hull reflecting the distant starlight. Inside the command center, Admiral Ta-One's scaled fingers tapped nervously against the holographic display, creating small ripples of light with each touch. The latest reports were grim. The Void Swarm had devoured the Centauri system, their 12th conquest this cycle alone. Around him, the command center buzzed with tension as representatives from 17 of the most advanced species in the known galaxy argued amongst themselves. Their voices, ranging from melodic whistles to deep resonant hums, created a cacophony that the translation matrices struggled to process. The air was thick with fear, something none of these ancient races were accustomed to feeling. The Proxima defense grid failed completely. A serpentine delegate hissed, their forked tongue flicking in agitation. 3,000 years of technological advancement, gone in minutes. High Commander Jaya floated forward, her crystalline form catching the light and sending rainbow patterns across the chamber walls. Unlike the organic species present, her people had evolved from living crystal, making her emotions visible through the changing patterns within her translucent body. Right now, those patterns swirled with dark colors of frustration and fear. "Our weapons are useless," she declared, her voice resonating like wind chimes in a storm. "The swarm adapts too quickly to our conventional tactics. Each time we develop a new defense, they evolve past it within hours." Taiwan replayed the simulation of the Proxima system's fall. The Coalition's most advanced battleships, each one a triumph of engineering that would have seemed like magic to lesser civilizations, crumbled like paper before the biological horror of the Void Swarm. The massive organic ships, more like spaceborne creatures than vessels, had simply absorbed or adapted to everything thrown at them. He watched as the simulation showed the swarm's attack pattern. There was something almost familiar about it, something that reminded him of ancient warfare documents he'd studied. His gaze drifted to a small icon in the corner of his display, a restricted file he wasn't supposed to know about. The file contained information about a species from the spiral arm of the galaxy, one that the Coalition's advanced scouts had discovered but been ordered to avoid contact with. They were deemed too volatile, too unpredictable, too prone to violence to join the civilized races of the Coalition. Taiwan's third eye blinked independently as he considered the implications. The Coalition had always valued order, predictability, and careful advancement. Their military doctrine was based on thousands of years of refined theory and precise application of overwhelming force. But the Void Swarm had proved immune to such orderly warfare. Perhaps what they needed was something different, something unpredictable, something that didn't follow the normal rules of civilized combat. The argument around him had devolved into accusations and recriminations. The Arthrosian delegate was threatening to withdraw their forces to protect their home systems. The Quantum Collective was suggesting a full retreat to the galactic core. Fear was destroying the greatest alliance the galaxy had ever known. "There might be one option left," Taiwan said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The chamber fell silent instantly, every eye, sensor, and sensory organ turning toward him. Even the translation matrices seemed to hold their computational breath. "There's a species we've been watching," he continued, bringing up a hologram of a blue-green planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. "They're young, by our standards. They've barely left their own planet, but they're different from any species we've encountered." The hologram showed scenes from the species' history, conflicts, battles, but also incredible acts of cooperation and innovation. Their technology was primitive, but their tactics and adaptability were unlike anything in Coalition records. "They call themselves humans," Taiwan said, watching the reactions around the room. "And they might be exactly what we need." The humans. Jaya's crystalline form flickered with alarm. The quarantine species, the ones who still fight among themselves, who developed weapons of mass destruction before achieving unified planetary government. Those humans. "Yes," Taiwan replied, a slight smile crossing his scaled features. "The same humans who developed 6 different ways to achieve powered flight. The same humans who went from primitive projectile weapons to spaceflight in less than a century. The same humans who, according to our observation posts, come up with new ways to solve problems that our predictive algorithms never even considered. He expanded the hologram, showing more of human history. They're chaotic, yes. Unpredictable, certainly. But look at how they fight. Look at how they adapt. Look at how they think. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs as the implications sank in. Contact with an unproven species was unprecedented. But then again, so was the threat they faced. The void swarm adapts to predictable patterns. Ta-1 concluded, perhaps what we need is a species that doesn't know how to be predictable. A species that turns chaos itself into a weapon. As the debate began anew around him, Ta-1 looked again at the image of Earth spinning slowly in the holographic display. The fate of the galaxy might rest on this one desperate gamble. But as he watched another simulation of the void swarm's inexorable advance, he knew they were running out of options. Sometimes, he thought, salvation comes from the most unlikely places. And sometimes, the only way to fight monsters was to find monsters of your own. The Coalition's diplomatic vessel descended through Earth's atmosphere, its advanced cloaking systems ensuring no human detection systems would notice its arrival. Jin-Ho stood at the observation window, his four arms clasped behind his back as he watched the sprawling city of Seoul come into view. The nighttime skyline glittered like scattered stars, a sight that reminded him of the spaceports back home. As the ship's chief xenologist, Jin-Ho had spent months immersing himself in human broadcasts, literature, and cultural data. He had studied their wars, their peace treaties, their entertainment, and their social structures. But nothing had prepared him for the raw energy that seemed to pulse from their cities. The ship landed silently in a predetermined location, a military base outside the city that had been cleared of all personnel, except for a select few humans who would meet them. Jin-Ho felt his secondary heart begin to race as the ship's environmental systems adjusted to match Earth's atmosphere. Remember, he told the Coalition delegation, humans are physically fragile compared to most species we know, but their minds work in ways we still don't fully understand. Be prepared for anything. The delegation consisted of representatives from 5 different Coalition species, each chosen for their ability to appear less threatening to human sensibilities. Jin-Ho's own species, with their multiple arms and iridescent skin, were considered among the more approachable-looking members of the Coalition. As the ship's doors opened, Earth's air rushed in. It smelled different from the sterile environment of their ship, rich with organic compounds and what Jin-Ho recognized from his studies as the scent of recent rain. The human delegation was waiting for them, standing in perfect military formation. General Sun Mei Park stood at the front of the human group. Jin-Ho had read her file extensively. Decorated military leader, strategic genius, and one of the few humans trusted with knowledge of the impending first contact. Despite being physically smaller than every member of the Coalition delegation, she somehow seemed to command the space around her. "Welcome to Earth," she said, her voice clear and strong. The Coalition's universal translators worked perfectly, converting her words into each species' native language. I must admit, when I was first briefed about this meeting, I thought someone was playing an elaborate joke. Jin-Ho stepped forward, performing the careful bow he had practiced, a gesture of respect in this region of Earth. "General Park, we thank you for agreeing to this meeting. We understand the shock our existence must cause." To his surprise, General Park laughed. "Shock? Please, we've been making movies about this moment for over a century. Though I must say, you look nothing like what Hollywood predicted." The casual way she dismissed the magnitude of their meeting caught Jin-Ho off guard. In his studies, he had noted humans' remarkable ability to adapt to new situations, but seeing it in person was different. The delegation was led into a conference room, where the Coalition representatives began their carefully prepared presentation. They explained about the void swarm, showing holographic displays of entire solar systems being consumed. They detailed the failure of their most advanced weapons, the collapse of defense systems that had protected civilizations for millennia. Throughout the presentation, General Park and her staff watched with increasing interest. They asked sharp, practical questions about the swarm's biology, their attack patterns, their weaknesses. The humans showed none of the fear that had paralyzed many coalition species. When the presentation ended, General Park leaned back in her chair, a peculiar expression on her face that Jin-Ho recognized from his studies as a smile, though there was something predatory about it. "So you're telling me there's a space bug problem?" she asked, her eyes gleaming with what appeared to be excitement rather than fear. "And your super-advanced weapons can't handle it? Interesting. We might have some ideas about that." She stood up and walked to the holographic display, studying the swarm's attack patterns. "You know, we've been fighting insects on Earth since before we invented writing. Every time we come up with a new pesticide, they adapt. Every time we build better defenses, they find a way through. But we're still here, and we've gotten pretty good at pest control." Jin-Ho watched in fascination as General Park began pulling up Earth's military history on a separate screen. "You've been fighting them like a superior force against an enemy that needs to be overwhelmed. But that's not how you fight swarms. You fight them like a guerrilla force. You fight dirty. You fight smart." The other coalition members shifted uncomfortably at her words. Fighting dirty went against everything their civilization stood for. But as Jin-Ho watched General Park outline rough ideas for tactics that had never occurred to their best military minds, he understood why the coalition had chosen to reach out to humans. "General," Jin-Ho said, "your species has never fought in space. You've never faced anything like the swarm." Park's smile grew wider. "True, but we've spent centuries imagining how we would. And sometimes, imagination is more valuable than experience. Now, shall we discuss how humanity can help save the galaxy?" As the meeting continued into the night, Jin-Ho realized that history would remember this moment, when the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy turned to one of the youngest for help. Whether that would be remembered as wisdom or desperation remained to be seen. Commander Kita paced the length of the coalition flagship's tactical room, his antennae twitching with barely contained agitation. The holographic battle simulation played out before him for the 10th time, showing the same chaotic maneuvers that the human tactical officer was proposing. "You want to do what?" Kita asked again, hoping he had somehow misunderstood. His 3 hearts were beating out of sync just thinking about it. Hajun, the human tactical officer, stood confidently by the simulation controls. He was dressed in the newly designed Human Coalition hybrid uniform, but he had rolled up the sleeves in a way that made the pristine garment look somehow rebellious. "Trust me," Hajun said, pointing to specific moments in the battle simulation. "The swarm thinks in patterns. They're like a supercomputer. They analyze, predict, and counter. So we break every pattern. We use your ships in ways they were never designed for. Your energy shields. We're going to pulse them to create electromagnetic waves that'll confuse their biological sensors." The other coalition officers in the room shifted uncomfortably. Their ships were masterpieces of engineering, designed over centuries for maximum efficiency. The idea of using them like this seemed almost sacrilegious. "These ships cost more than your entire planet's GDP," one of the coalition engineers protested. "They're not meant to be used as electromagnetic pulse generators." Hajun grinned, a gesture that still made some of the alien officers nervous. "Exactly. That's why it'll work. Look at your combat records. Every time you use conventional tactics, the swarm adapts within minutes. But they've never seen anything like what we're proposing." He manipulated the holographic display, showing a new simulation. Coalition ships moved in seemingly random patterns, their shield harmonics fluctuating wildly. Some ships flew backwards, using their forward shields as battering rams. Others spun on their axes, creating spiral patterns of defensive fire that no tactical computer would ever recommend. "It's madness," Kita whispered, But he couldn't take his eyes off the simulation. "It's human," Hajun corrected. "We've spent our entire history fighting enemies bigger and stronger than us. We learned that when you can't win with brute force, you have to get creative." The simulation continued, showing how the electromagnetic pulses from the shields would interfere with the swarm's neural network. The human had somehow figured out how to use the ship's waste heat as a weapon, creating thermal barriers that would confuse the swarm's biological sensors. And this? Hajun pointed to a particularly chaotic moment in the simulation. "We're going to have your ships fire their weapons at partial power, random frequencies. The swarm's adaptive shields are designed to counter specific energy signatures. But if we keep changing those signatures, they won't know what to adapt to," finished Kita, beginning to understand. It was like nothing he'd seen in his 3 centuries of military service. The first real battle came sooner than anyone expected. A swarm fleet emerged from hyperspace near the Rigel colony, expecting to find the usual organized resistance they had easily overcome before. Instead, they found chaos. Beautiful, calculated chaos. Coalition ships moved like drunk dancers, their patterns impossible to predict because there were no patterns. Energy shields pulsed and flickered in ways that made the swarm's biological sensors report impossible readings. Weapons fire came in bursts of varying power. Some shots so weak they seemed like mistakes, others overcharged to the point of being dangerous to the firing ship. Hajun stood at the tactical station, directing the battle like a conductor leading an orchestra of destruction. Kita watched in amazement as the swarm ships began to show signs of confusion. Their usual perfect formation began to break down. "They're trying to adapt," Hajun explained, his eyes never leaving the tactical display. "But they can't adapt to chaos. Every time they think they've figured out our pattern, we switch to something completely different." A swarm ship, one of their massive biological dreadnoughts, suddenly began to retreat. Then another, and another. For the first time in recorded history, the void swarm was falling back in confusion. The cheers that erupted on the bridge were in a dozen different alien languages, but the joy needed no translation. Kita found himself standing next to Hajun, watching the swarm fleet disappear into hyperspace. "I still don't fully understand how you came up with this," Kita admitted. Hajun smiled. "You know what humans did before we had advanced weapons. We used to hunt animals much larger than ourselves by confusing them, making noise, coming at them from multiple directions until they didn't know what to do. Some things never change." As the celebration continued around them, Kita realized that the galaxy was changing. The Coalition had spent millennia advancing in a straight line, always seeking the most efficient, most logical solution. But now they were learning from humans that sometimes the best path forward wasn't straight at all. Sometimes it was a wild, unpredictable dance. The void swarm had retreated, but they would be back. And next time, thanks to human ingenuity, the Coalition would be ready with even more impossible, illogical, brilliant chaos. Captain Du Yun stood before the Coalition War Council, surrounded by holographic displays showing the latest battle data. The massive chamber, designed to accommodate beings of all sizes and forms, hummed with anticipation. Representatives from 100 worlds watched as the human captain prepared to explain their latest victories against the void swarm. "The beauty of it," Du Yun explained, gesturing to a simulation of their most recent engagement, "is that humans have been fighting among themselves for millennia. We've learned to think like both predator and prey. Every human strategic advancement came from necessity, from having to outthink opponents who knew exactly how we thought." The council members watched in fascination as he brought up historical footage from Earth's military history. Ancient armies clashing on open fields transformed into modern warfare, then into the complex space battles they now faced. "Look here," he said, highlighting a particular formation of Coalition ships. "We've adapted your vessels to move in what appears to be random chaos, but it's actually based on predator-prey dynamics we observed in Earth's oceans. Sharks don't swim in straight lines when hunting. They circle, they feint, they create confusion. A quantum collective representative pulsed with curiosity. But surely the swarm will eventually detect these patterns. Do Yun smiled. That's the clever part. We're not using just one pattern. We're using thousands, all based on different predator-prey relationships from Earth. The formations switch randomly, following mathematical models developed by our game theorists. It's ordered chaos. Impossible to predict unless you understand how humans think, which the swarm doesn't. The simulation showed coalition ships performing maneuvers that would have been considered insane just months ago. Ships rolled and twisted, using their momentum in ways that defied conventional space combat doctrine. Some vessels deliberately exposed their weakened shields, baiting swarm ships into traps. Our pilots are learning to think like fighter pilots from Earth's history, Du Yun continued. They're embracing concepts like dogfighting, guerrilla tactics, and what we call controlled recklessness. Every pilot has multiple battle plans they can switch between at will. An elder council member, their crystalline form shimmering with concern, spoke up. But this seems so inefficient. Our ships were designed for optimal performance in standard combat formations. Exactly, Du Yun replied. And that's why it works. The swarm evolved to counter efficiency. They expect logical, optimal responses. But humans, we've never been logical in combat. We've always been emotional, adaptive, and sometimes completely irrational. He brought up new data showing the swarm's mounting losses. Their perfect formations were breaking down, their responses becoming erratic as they failed to adapt to the constantly changing human tactics. We've also introduced what we call controlled chaos zones in major battles. Du Yun explained, highlighting sections of space where coalition ships seem to move in complete disorder. These zones follow mathematical patterns so complex that even our own tactical computers can't predict them. The only ones who can navigate them are our human pilots and those who've trained in human combat techniques. The council chamber filled with murmurs as members discussed among themselves. The results were undeniable. The swarm was losing ground for the first time since they appeared. There's something else, Du Yun added, his voice growing serious. We've noticed the swarm trying to adapt to our tactics, but every time they think they've figured us out, we switch to something completely different. We're not just fighting them. We're teaching the entire coalition fleet to think like humans. He showed footage of alien pilots performing maneuvers that would make Earth's greatest fighter aces proud. Coalition ships now moved with an unpredictability that bordered on artistry, their formations flowing like schools of fish evading predators. Some of your species have actually improved on our techniques, Du Yun admitted with pride. The quantum collective's ability to process multiple battle plans simultaneously has taken our strategies to new levels. The crystalline being's natural understanding of light refraction has created entirely new ways of confusing swarm sensors. The council watched as more battle footage played out. The Void Swarm's once perfect order was crumbling against the coalition's new fighting style. Their biological ships, used to facing predictable opponents, found themselves caught in elaborate traps that seemed to defy logic itself. We're not just winning battles, Du Yun concluded. We're changing how war is fought in this galaxy. The swarm evolved to counter perfect order, but they never evolved to handle human chaos. As the presentation ended, the council chamber erupted in discussion. Species that had once looked down on humans as primitive were now eagerly adopting their tactics. The galaxy was changing, becoming more unpredictable, more human. Du Yun stood back, watching the council members debate. He knew that this was just the beginning. Humans had thousands of years of warfare to draw upon. Countless strategies developed through countless conflicts. The swarm might adapt to some of their tactics, but they could never adapt to human ingenuity itself. The war was far from over, but for the first time, victory seemed possible, not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through humanity's greatest weapon, their ability to embrace chaos and turn it into an art form. Science officer Minji hadn't slept in 3 Earth days, sustained only by synthetic caffeine, and the burning desire to understand their enemy. Her laboratory aboard the Coalition flagship was cluttered with holographic displays showing neural patterns, quantum field measurements, and endless streams of data collected from captured swarm tissue samples. Her breakthrough came when she noticed something in the quantum resonance patterns, a similarity to something she'd studied years ago on Earth. She rushed to the emergency council session, her normally neat uniform wrinkled from hours in the lab. "The swarm communicates through quantum-entangled neurons," she announced to the assembled leaders, her voice hoarse from exhaustion, but filled with excitement. "That's why they adapt so quickly. But it's also their weakness. They can't handle too many conflicting inputs simultaneously." The council chamber erupted in questions, but Minji held up her hand, pulling up a detailed hologram of a swarm neural network. "Look here," she pointed to the pulsing quantum signatures. "Their entire consciousness is linked. Every drone, every ship, every soldier, they're all part of one massive quantum network. It's beautiful, really. Perfect communication, perfect coordination." She manipulated the hologram, showing how the network responded to various stimuli. "But that's also their weakness. When we send them conflicting information, it doesn't just confuse individual units, it ripples through their entire consciousness. It's like trying to think thousands of different thoughts at once." Admiral Ta-1 leaned forward, his scaled features intense. "And you can exploit this." Minji smiled, pulling up another display. "We already have. Remember those irrational battle tactics that worked so well? They weren't just confusing their tactical systems, they were creating quantum disruption patterns in their neural network. We've been accidentally attacking their consciousness this whole time." She brought up a new simulation, showing a modified version of their current battle strategies. "But now we can do it deliberately. We can design quantum interference patterns specifically targeted to disrupt their network. Combine that with our chaos tactics." The human general, Sunley Park, who had been quietly observing, suddenly laughed. "We're going to give the swarm a migraine." Operation Chaos came together faster than anyone expected. Coalition engineers worked alongside human programmers to develop quantum disruptor arrays. The weapons themselves were simple. It was the patterns they generated that were revolutionary. "Think of it like a denial-of-service attack," Minji explained to the fleet commanders. "But instead of overwhelming computer servers, we're overwhelming their shared consciousness with contradictory information." The combined coalition human fleet gathered at the edge of swarm territory. Ships of all sizes and designs, from crystalline coalition dreadnoughts to smaller, more aggressive human vessels, moved into formation. Each was equipped with Minji's quantum disruptors and loaded with virus-like programs designed to exploit the swarm's neural network. The battle began with familiar chaos tactics, ships moving in unpredictable patterns, firing at random intervals, creating the beautiful disorder that had served them so well. But this time, hidden within the chaos was purpose. Every maneuver, every weapon's burst, every shield fluctuation was carefully calculated to generate specific quantum interference patterns. The swarm ships responded as they always had, trying to adapt and counter the apparent randomness. Then Minji gave the signal. Thousands of quantum disruptors activated simultaneously, flooding the battlefield with carefully designed interference patterns. The virus programs, hiding in what appeared to be normal combat data, slipped into the swarm's neural network through their own adaptive sensors. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Swarm ships began to move erratically, their perfect formation dissolving into genuine chaos. Some ships fired on their own allies, others spun in circles or simply stopped moving entirely. "It's working," Minji shouted, watching the quantum field measurements spike. "Their network can't process all the contradictory inputs. They're experiencing the equivalent of a massive seizure." The coalition fleet pressed their advantage, their tactics shifting from chaos to precise, coordinated strikes against the confused enemy. Swarm ships that had seemed invincible mere months ago now fell easily to concentrated fire. In the midst of battle, Minji noticed something unexpected in her readings. The swarm. They're trying to disconnect their neural network, trying to isolate parts of their consciousness to protect themselves. General Park grinned. They're learning fear. They're learning that sometimes being perfectly connected isn't an advantage. The battle raged for hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. For the first time, the Void Swarm was not just retreating. They were being routed. Their remaining ships fled in genuine disorder, their feared neural network now a liability rather than a strength. As the fleet regrouped, Minji looked at the battlefield readings with a mixture of pride and awe. They had done more than win a battle. They had fundamentally changed the nature of the war. The swarm's greatest strength had become their greatest weakness, all because humans had taught the coalition how to think differently. "You know what's really ironic?" she said to no one in particular. "We won because we're messy, because we think in chaos, because we're everything they're not." The quantum field readings continue to scroll across her screens, showing the lingering effects of their attack on the swarm's neural network. They had found more than just a weakness. They had found a way to fight back. And somewhere out there, the swarm was learning a lesson that humanity had known for millennia. Sometimes the most powerful force in the universe is chaos itself. The combined fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the swarm's home system. Thousands of ships, representing both humanity's ingenuity and the coalition's advanced technology, moved into formation around the flagship. At the heart of the fleet, the massive command ship carried something that looked deceptively simple, a device no larger than a human hand. Admiral Tawan stood on the bridge, his scaled hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the tactical display. Beside him, General Sunmei studied the same display, her expression focused and determined. They had both aged during this war, but there was a fierce energy about them that infected the entire crew. "The neural scrambler is ready," reported Science Officer Minji from her station. "All ships are synchronized and in position to create the quantum field matrix." The neural scrambler was a marvel of cooperation, human viral programming combined with coalition quantum technology. It looked simple, but contained the most complex code ever written, designed to infect and overwhelm the swarm's shared consciousness. In human history, Sunmai had explained during the weapon's development, we learned that the biggest creatures often fall to the smallest weapons. Sometimes all you need is the right virus. She had reminded everyone how Earth's mighty dinosaurs had been undone not by force, but by time and change. The swarm's response was immediate and massive. Biological ships, each the size of small moons, emerged from the system's inner planets. They moved with their characteristic perfect coordination, their neural network allowing them to act as one massive organism. "Look at them," Tawan murmured, still so confident in their greatest strength. The fleet began its approach, implementing the chaos tactics that had served them so well. Ships moved in seemingly random patterns, their movements designed to confuse and distract. But this time, hidden within the chaos was purpose. The neural scrambler began its work silently, invisibly. It sent out quantum pulses that matched the swarm's neural frequencies, disguising itself as part of their network. Like a virus entering a cell, it slipped past their defenses by appearing to belong. The first signs of success came quickly. A group of swarm ships suddenly broke formation, their movements becoming erratic. Then another group began firing at random, their perfect coordination failing. "It's working," Minji announced, her eyes fixed on the quantum readings. "The scrambler is replicating through their network. Every ship it infects becomes a new transmission point." The swarm's response was desperate and fascinating. Parts of their fleet tried to disconnect from the network, attempting to isolate themselves from the infection. But this only made them vulnerable to the coalition's conventional weapons. "They're learning the downside of perfect unity," Sunmei observed. "When everything is connected, everything is vulnerable." The battle transformed into something unlike anything seen before in galactic history. The swarm's biological ships began to turn on each other, their shared consciousness corrupted by the neural scrambler's conflicting commands. Some ships attempted to flee, others fought with increasing desperation. Taiwan gave the order for the final phase. The fleet moved in, their formation shifting from chaos to perfect coordination. Every ship fired simultaneously, their weapons targeted at the weak points created by the neural scrambler's disruption. The swarm's home system became a grave for their greatest ships. Their biological vessels, once seemingly invincible, fell one by one to the combined might of human cunning and coalition technology. Look, Sun Li pointed to a new reading. They're trying to evolve past the scrambler. Their biological systems are attempting to adapt. But they can't, Minji replied with satisfaction. The scrambler isn't just one virus. It's thousands, each one evolving faster than they can. Another human idea, using their own adaptive abilities against them. The final moments of the battle were almost anticlimactic. The remaining swarm ships, their neural network thoroughly corrupted, either fled into deep space or fell into decaying orbits around their home world. The mighty Void Swarm, terror of the galaxy, had been undone by a weapon smaller than a human hand. As the fleet secured the system, Taiwan turned to Sun Li. Your species never ceases to amaze me. You turned their greatest strength into their greatest weakness. Sun Li smiled, but there was a thoughtful look in her eyes. We just understood something that the swarm never did. Perfect unity isn't always perfect strength. Sometimes the ability to think differently, to act independently, to embrace chaos, that's what makes us strong. The neural scrambler continued its work, spreading through any remaining swarm vessels, ensuring their threat would never rise again. In the end, it wasn't superior firepower or advanced technology that had won the war. It was understanding. Understanding that sometimes the smallest changes can have the biggest effects, and that strength can often be found in imperfection. The galaxy would never be the same. The Coalition had learned from humanity. Humanity had learned from the Coalition, and together they had proven that diversity, of thought, of approach, of being, was the greatest strength of all. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Coalition gleamed under the light of three suns, its crystalline architecture reflecting countless colors across the gathered representatives of 1,000 worlds. 1 year had passed since the defeat of the Void Swarm, and the galaxy had changed in ways few could have imagined. Jinho stood at the central podium, his forearms steady as he addressed the largest gathering in Coalition history. The chamber was filled not just with the usual Coalition species, but also with human representatives from Earth, a sight that would have been unthinkable just 2 years ago. We feared humans because they were unpredictable, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the perfect acoustics of the hall. We now understand that this very unpredictability, this chaos within order, is exactly what the galaxy needed. The holographic displays around him showed scenes from the war. Coalition ships moving in seemingly random patterns, human tactics confounding the swarm, and finally, the neural scrambler's devastating effect on the enemy's consciousness. Each image was a reminder of how humanity had changed the very nature of warfare in the galaxy. Our civilization spent millennia perfecting order, Jinho continued. We built our society on predictability, on logical progression. And then we met a species that thrived on chaos, that turned unpredictability into an art form. We met humanity. The human delegation sat proudly among their alien counterparts. General Sun Mi Park, now Earth's chief representative to the Coalition, wore a uniform that blended human military tradition with Coalition diplomatic styles. Next to her, Admiral Taiwan's scaled features showed what his species considered a smile. The Void Swarm was the perfect enemy for our perfect civilization, Jinho said. They adapted to everything we did because we were predictable. But they could never adapt to humanity because humanity never stops changing, never stops evolving, never stops surprising even themselves. The assembly chamber hummed with agreement. Species that had once looked down on humans as primitive now regarded them with a mixture of respect and fascination. The Coalition had learned that progress didn't always mean moving in a straight line. The vote was a formality. Everyone knew the outcome before it began. Every member of the assembly, representing civilizations spanning the galaxy, voted to offer humanity full membership in the coalition. Earth would join as an equal partner, bringing their unique perspective to the greatest alliance in known space. As the representatives moved forward to sign the historic documents, conversations filled the chamber. Crystalline beings discussed chaos theory with human mathematicians. Quantum collective members debated poetry with Earth's cultural attaches. The barriers between species were breaking down in ways no one had anticipated. Admiral Ta-1 leaned over to General Sunmei as they watched the signing ceremony. "You know," he whispered, his translator perfectly conveying his mix of amusement and concern, "we're still not sure whether to be grateful or terrified of how your species thinks." Sunmei smiled, that particular human expression that still fascinated many coalition species. "That's probably for the best," she replied. "Keep them guessing. That's the human way." The signing ceremony continued as representatives from every world added their marks to the document. Each signature represented not just an agreement between species, but an acknowledgement that the galaxy had changed forever. Science Officer Minji, now heading a new joint research initiative, stood with a group of coalition scientists. They were already applying human chaos theory to everything from space travel to energy production. The neural scrambler's success had opened up entirely new fields of study. "The beautiful thing," Minji explained to her colleagues, "is that we're just getting started. Humanity has thousands of years of ideas that we've never applied to advanced technology. Imagine what we can do together." As the ceremony drew to a close, Jinho made one final observation to the assembly. "We thought we were teaching humanity about the galaxy," he said, "but they taught us something far more valuable, that sometimes the most primitive solution could overcome the most advanced problem. That chaos and order are not opposites, but partners in the dance of existence." The galaxy had indeed changed. The coalition had learned to embrace uncertainty, to find strength in diversity, to see beauty in imperfection. And humanity. They were already looking to the stars with new eyes, eager to share their unique perspective with their cosmic neighbors. As the three suns set outside the assembly hall, casting rainbow patterns through the crystal walls, the gathered species knew they were witnessing the dawn of a new era. An era where the combined strength of human unpredictability and coalition technology would take them further than either could have gone alone. The story of humanity and the coalition was just beginning, and no one, human or alien, could predict where it would lead, and that perhaps was the greatest victory of all.